Wonderful.
Welcome, 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 everyone. It is such a pleasure to see you all here. At this point, I'm sure most of you have seen or heard me at least once, and many of you are probably sick of me, but my name is Dhruva. I'm one of the directors, along with Stephen, of the Lumiere Research Scholar Program. I'm a PhD candidate at Oxford, and I am so excited and happy to welcome you all to the Summer Cohort 2022's graduation ceremony today. Ahead of us, we've got some super exciting things. We've got some opening remarks, some celebration of the students. We've got our special guest, Professor Oliver Hart of Harvard, who's joined us so generously to share a little bit about his own life and experience with research. We've got student presentations from some absolutely incredible researchers from across the summer. And finally, we've got a farewell and a welcome to the alumni community. So let's dive into it. If we could move on to the next slide. As with any Lumiere event, as by sure you guys all know, please keep your videos on and your audio off. That's entirely self-interested for you all, so that if any of you start to fall asleep, both Professor Hart and I will know that we then need to get our energy levels up. So please keep your videos on. It'll also make it a more fun experience for everyone involved. But wow, I can't believe we're wrapping up the summer cohort. I want you all to think back, especially the students in the audience, to 3, 4, 5 months ago when you first applied for this program, when you filled out that application form, when you stepped into that interview, kind of nervous, kind of unsure about what you were getting yourself into. You're now officially on the other side, and I couldn't be prouder or happier for all of you. This has been an incredible summer cohort, our largest cohort yet, more than 500 students from over 30 different countries doing research in 23 different disciplines. That's a crazy number, and I'm so glad that all of you joined us on this journey. I want to share a story of a particular student from this cohort who emailed me towards the end of the cohort asking to get on a call. And usually when that happens, I get kind of nervous because that's a sign that something may have gone wrong, that the student might be nervous, might be struggling to finish their paper, whatever it is. So I got onto this paper, not entirely sure what I was getting myself into. And the student, this amazing student named Madalisa from Plano, Texas, shows up on screen in front of this bright green backlit series of bottles behind her. And she starts telling me about her project. And turns out that she'd done a project with her mentor where she created a set of bioreactors. So she grew algae in little bottles behind her and then fed the algae different kinds of bacteria to try and grow them quicker, with the idea that if down the line, these algae could then be used as biomass to create renewable electricity. And the reason she wanted to get on the call was to talk me through her project, how excited she was to have done it, and to thank me and the Laureate team for this opportunity. And I think that entire experience left me sort of really believing in the mission of this program and what you all have achieved. Because I think Madalisa's story brings three things together, which I think are so important to be a researcher, and something that I think all of you have demonstrated. The first is an intellectual curiosity. For her, working on bioreactors and building this was something that she was obsessed by over the summer. She spent hours and hours each week doing this. I'm sure her parents were a little concerned because she bought a little Bunsen burner and was using it to sort of heat things up in her bedroom. But she did it because that possessed her, and she was excited by it. The second is a crazy work ethic. School is hard enough already. The fact that you would choose to spend your free time doing more school, diving into more academics and writing a paper is something that very few high school students across the world would choose to do. And the fact that you've chosen to do it and you've put hours after hours into this, even when things seem difficult, even when you were sort of looking at that white screen and the words wouldn't write themselves, I think the fact that you persevered through that demonstrates a work ethic that's truly impressive. And finally, it shows, Madalisa's story in particular, shows the spirit of sort of gratitude and thankfulness and acknowledgement of the opportunity that she's been given, which I think is really important for all of us to recognize. The ability to work with a PhD mentor from a top university is something that only a handful of students across the world get every year. And you've been given this incredible gift, this incredible opportunity. And I ask you, as you go away from this graduation ceremony, to think, what will you do with this gift? How will you take your research forward? How will you build on human knowledge? And most importantly, how will you pay this forward to somebody else in the future? And whether that's by coming back to Lumiere as a mentor 8-10 years from now, or through other ways of passing on research to people in your own community, in your own school, I hope you I hope you take the opportunity to do that. But congratulations once again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the parents, to the mentors, to the partners, and the Lumiere team, and of course, Professor Hart, for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to move into passing on the mic in a few seconds to Professor Hart. Professor Hart is an absolute legend. So before I started my PhD, I was an undergrad at Harvard. Stephen and I were classmates there, and I was in the Harvard economics department. An incredibly exciting thing happened in 2016. The year before I was meant to graduate, as it happens every year, we were sort of waiting for the BBC notification to pop up, or the New York Times notification to pop up, letting us know who won the Nobel Prize. And that time around, turns out that it was one of our own. And I remember the kind of excitement that gripped the campus, and especially the economics department, because for those of us who had read his work and knew him, I think Professor Hart was someone who really brought so much expertise and knowledge on contracts and on corporate finance, on issues related to law and economics, and it really revolutionized these fields. And the opportunity for us to celebrate him that day was super meaningful, and continues to be something that I deeply am grateful for today. So Professor Hart, economics professor at Harvard University, recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2016, and a number of other honors that I think it would take far too long to list out here. We're so grateful to have you. And I'm going to pass it over to you to share a few words with the students and the audience.
Okay. let me just find the appropriate thing here. I'm just going to be looking at it myself. Well, thank you very much, Dhruva, for those remarks. And I want to start by echoing what he said. I want to congratulate the Lumiere graduates of summer 2022. Well done. I've heard a bit about the program. It sounds extremely interesting. In fact, I'm a bit jealous of you because I certainly, nothing like this happened to me when I was a kid. Maybe I was, too lazy anyway to do it, but it certainly wasn't a possibility. And it sounds extremely exciting. The kind of thing that, may give you a taste to pursue a research career, which I think would be great. I ended up pursuing a research career, an academic career, but I really stumbled into it. I started off thinking I wanted to be a mathematician. That was my favorite subject at school, and I was pretty good at it. So when it came time to apply to university, I said I wanted to do mathematics, and that's what I did. I got admitted to Cambridge University, which was very good in mathematics, and I spent 3 years studying mathematics. And the way the British system works, I think it still works this way. Some of you will be familiar with it. You specialize completely. So I spent 3 years studying mathematics and nothing else, which, looking back on it, I feel, couldn't I have learned a few other skills at the same time? I mean, during the process, I realized 2 things. First of all, I was sort of in the middle of the class. There were others who were clearly much more talented. And second, there were, I still like mathematics, but, there were parts of it which I found kind of boring. We were subjected to fluid dynamics, something which I have to say I didn't warm to, and I've never used any of that later. But I will say this, that although, as I say, I could have done other things, the grounding I got at Cambridge has proved invaluable in my work in economics. Anyway, I graduated in 1969, which probably, sounds like about 100 years ago to you, but isn't quite that long. The question was what to do next. So at that time, I mean, the idea, at least to me, of getting a real job was totally unappealing. So I had to find something else to do. And so, doing further studies seemed to be the best thing. And why economics? Well, as I say, it was clear to me I was not going to make it as a professional mathematician. I talked to various people and I was told that mathematics was being applied to economics, so that seemed attractive. And the other reason to study economics was that I was quite political at the time. I was pretty left-wing, and I loved to argue with people about politics. But what was frustrating was when I got into arguments, the other person always at some point brought up some economic issue, started talking about the balance of payments, for example, and I knew nothing about it. And at that point, I lost the argument. And so I was very frustrated about that. I thought I really must learn something about this subject. So what I did was I did a master's degree at Warwick University, which is normally 1 year, but because I knew no economics, I did it in 2 years. Then I went to Princeton for a PhD and sort of emerged as an economic theorist or a mathematical economist. And, being British, I wanted to go back to the UK at least for a while. And I spent 10 years back in the UK, first at Essex, then at Cambridge, then at LSE. And then I moved to the US in 1984, first to MIT, and then in 1993 to Harvard. So that's sort of roughly my career path. Now, I think, probably what's more interesting than that is my evolution as an economist. So, I'd come from mathematics, so I was still very much thinking mathematically. It took me a while to learn the way economists think. They have their intuitions, their ways of thinking, which are very powerful, and you have to acquire that skill. And that took a while. So my PhD dissertation was sort of rather technical. It was on general equilibrium theory, which was very much the hot thing at that time. But I sort of extended what some other people had done to the case where there isn't a complete set of markets. So I don't know how many of you have done any general equilibrium theory, but there's sort of the classic model. You assume there are markets for everything. And I was interested in, well, what happens when some markets are missing? And so that's what I did. That's how I got my first job. But, you know, this work was a sort of abstract. I was taking models that were pretty well established in the literature and sort of pushing them in some, you know, slightly new direction. I wasn't really trying to explain any particular empirical phenomenon at that point. And that changed. So a very important moment in my life, or period in my life, started when I met Sanford Grossman, who has been one of my main co-authors over my career. And Sandy is I don't know whether you know, familiar with his work. He left academia at some point to become a very successful hedge fund manager, but he did a lot of important work, and not just with me. But the thing is, he had been trained in Chicago, and that's a very different, at least at that time, their approach was very different. Apart from being rather conservative, Milton Friedman and all that, they also, you know, really thought that the purpose of economics was to understand the world, not to do sort of clever things which were just interesting to other economists, which was a bit what I had been up to. Of course, sometimes you can do both. Perhaps that's some of the best work. You both explain something in the world and it's very ingenious as well. You know, that's a kind of real winner. But perhaps, you know, don't just do clever things. As a result of that, my work really evolved. And just to give you a sense of the kind of topics I've worked on and how they progressed. So after my dissertation, I was interested in the question of what the right objective for a firm is, or a company, in a world of uncertainty. So economists often argue that companies should maximize profit, but in a world of uncertainty, profit is uncertain. You can't maximize a random variable. So do you maximize the expectation, the mean? What about the variance? Do you care about that? And I thought the right answer was, well, let's ask what the owners of the company want. You know, because some of them may be more risk averse, some of them less risk averse. So some may want you to go for broke, but others want you to be more cautious. And how do you aggregate the preferences of the different owners or shareholders? So I sort of got into that for a while, but at some point, and this is partly, you know, when I was working with Grossman, we sort of came to the conclusion that actually a more important problem, at least I thought this at the time, was so put aside shareholders with different attitudes to risk and just think about the conflict between shareholders and managers. So this is the thing that everyone sort of eventually in the 70s focused on. That is, you know, let's assume the shareholders all want the same thing. Maybe they're risk neutral. So they want the company to maximize expected long-run return. The managers may have different objectives. They may be lazy. They may be empire builders. This conflict between managers and shareholders is sort of part of what's called the principal agent problem, which you may have come across. It's certainly an important part of economics. The shareholders here are the principal. The manager is the agent. How do the shareholders make sure that the managers' objectives are aligned with their own? And initially, I thought that the financial structure of the company could be one of the ways to get managers to do the right thing. Having a lot of debt, for example, could put pressure on them to maximize profit. Takeover bids, I was also interested in takeover bids as a way to discipline managers. if they're not doing the right thing, some activist at the time, people were making full takeover bids for companies, hostile bids. That's less common now, but they would come in and buy the company up if it wasn't being well managed. So I wrote some papers on that, and I seem to have lost my. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go back to. Somehow I lost my notes. Let me just go back to that. Yeah. So at some point, though, with co-authors, I realized, well, if you're really going to study the conflict between the principal and the agent, it's natural actually to think in terms of incentive schemes instead of thinking about the financial structure of the company or takeover bids. What about just putting the manager on some sort of optimal incentive scheme, where you give them shares or stock options or something else? It's pay for performance. Why don't we try to solve the problem that way? So that led me squarely into principal agent theory. I did some work there. And then, and I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but I just want to give you a general sense that then at some point, and this started off with Grossman, and then I continued the work with Moore, we got interested in a very basic question in economics, which is, what determines the boundaries of the firm? So this is, think of the owner of the firm and the principal agent problem with the manager. Another question, that's sort of taking the firm as given. But what under what conditions would one firm buy another firm? What's the reason to do that? And to make that a little more precise, the issue, let's consider the make or buy decision. So this is where the boundaries of the firm really come in. So imagine you're a company and you need some input for your production process. You have a choice. You could contract with an outside provider of this input, or you could produce it in-house. And this is the boundaries of the firm. If you're doing it through an arm's length contract with some outside entity, then you have basically your firm and their firm. That's two firms. But if you do it in-house, think about acquiring that firm and those people will become employees of your firm, then you've extended the boundaries of the firm. You've turned two firms into one. What are the costs and benefits of doing it one way or the other? And this is a question that goes back to Ronald Coase. First raised this question in a famous 1937 article. He won the Nobel Prize partly for that work, and then Oliver Williamson continued this, and he also won the Nobel Prize. And then, I've worked as well. And one of the funny things about this is there are a lot of Nobel Prizes in this area, but actually we still don't really, in my opinion, quite have the answer to this question. But one thing we have learned, I think, that it has to do with incomplete contracts. So a lot of my work has been, since I started working on the boundaries of the firm, it's been about incomplete contracts. Incomplete contracts are ones where the basic idea is, it's a bit like incomplete markets. You can't, when you want, firm A wants some input from firm B, maybe for the next 10, 20 years, it's a long-term relationship. They write a contract, but they can't foresee everything that's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. And so they can't put all the contingencies in the contract they'd like to. Just think of the pandemic, or, that's something that was unanticipated. It hit us, but very few contracts had a pandemic clause in them. Or take the war in Ukraine. That's also an unexpected and very unpleasant event. And if people had anticipated that as a possibility, they might have put in a clause in a contract saying, if Russia invades Ukraine, we will do the following. But mostly they don't do that, and so contracts are incomplete. And in my work, I've stressed that the boundaries of the firm really turn on the best way to deal with contractual incompleteness. Anyway, during this evolution, so I was getting into the law, because in order to understand contracts and the limits of contracts, you really have to understand how the legal system works. So it turned out that I not only needed to do this, but I found it very interesting. And so one of the things that's happened to me over my career is from, starting off in mathematics and really being quite narrow, over time, my sort of research, the things I was interested in, pushed me in new directions. And in particular, I have learned quite a bit about the law, and some of my best friends are lawyers, legal academics. I co-run a seminar over at the Harvard Law School, and this has all been enormously important. And not only has it been important to understand how the law works when it comes to contracts, another thing which has really helped me is that in talking to lawyers, I realized they are not really capable, most of them, even the ones who are, some of them are trained in economics, but they're not really good at technical models, most of them. And so if you want to convey your ideas to them and also learn from them, then you really have to simplify what you're doing. But one of the things I learned was that when you simplify things, you really understand things better. So when you're forced to actually explain to people what you're up to in simple English, sometimes with some numerical examples, sometimes with some hypotheticals, lawyers are very good at that, it forces you really to make sure you've understood everything, and often you haven't. So I learned to sort of present things in a simpler way, and also to write in a simpler way, and to write better. And I think, yes, I think I started off as a terrible writer, partly because I'd studied, mathematics and nothing else for 3 years at Cambridge. It would have been very good if I'd been writing some stuff during that time, just as you've written stuff in your projects. I mean, this is one of the things you're doing at a very young age. But the first time I actually wrote a serious paper, and by that I mean for not for publication, but anything of any length with references and so on, I think it was when I got to Princeton, so I had to sort of start from scratch. And as I say, hanging out with lawyers has really made me a much better writer, because I know I have to write things in a way in a way that's compelling and also really easy to understand. I don't mean they're very smart. Lawyers are very smart, but you've got to just make sure, as I say, that you make the arguments really crystal clear. Okay, let me just conclude with a few lessons then. What do I draw from all this? What might be useful for you? Well, first of all, be prepared to change. I did. I really, I think if I look at myself now, the kinds of things I work on, the way I work on them, and I compare that to the person who graduated from Princeton at the age of, what was it, 25 or something, I wouldn't recognize, I recognize my old self. I don't think my old self would recognize my new self. So, that's something one should be open to. And second thing, which I haven't really talked about, but is important, a research career is usually not smooth. Some people perhaps are very lucky, they hit the big time very early, although even that can be problematic, because of course then, the question is, can you keep it up? I didn't really have any, I've always worked a little bit outside the mainstream. So although my work, was appreciated, it was never the hot thing that was going on. There were always some hot things in economics everybody was talking about. My work was never in that category. Maybe it was in, as Struve has mentioned, yes, 2016 was a great moment, because when you win the Nobel Prize, suddenly everybody focuses on what you're doing. And that lasts a while. Then eventually they forget about you. But there's this nice period. But I think, for whatever reason, I was a bit, doing my own thing. And that can be a bit lonely. And one thing that can help a lot, and this is true for anybody doing research, is to have co-authors. I've found, I've had two main co-authors in my career, actually three. I now have a new one, Luigi Zingales. And co-authors are wonderful because, first of all, when you talk about ideas with somebody else, usually, if it's a good co-author, then the the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? Each of you is adding value, and you end up with something that neither of you could do alone. So that's, of course, the main reason to have a co-author, but it's not the only reason. I think the other reason is it's just nice to have someone to talk to. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, there's a bit of background noise. I'm trying to figure out where that's from.
Okay, all right. I'm nearly finished, but let me just say, if you can hear me, that
I'm just going to try and mute everyone. If you could unmute yourself and just continue. Sorry about that.
Oliver, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now again?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. All right. So let me just say that another reason to have a co-author is because you can sympathize with each other. You know, when your paper is rejected by the journal, or you know, you present it and it doesn't go down very well, you have someone who's going to be on your side. And I think that's important. I found it very, very helpful. But you know, the way research is, they're going to be good times, they're going to be bad times. And you know, I think as a result, it's not a career for everybody. You know, some people just want a more regular job without the ups and downs. But of course, there are tremendous positives to it. I don't regret for a moment having an academic career. Actually, I think in my case, I don't really think I could have done anything else. Some people have outside options. I don't really think I did. But I would say to anybody who's thinking about it, that on the positive side, you have enormous freedom, you know, to do what you want, to manage your own time. That's one of the great things about being an academic. And when you do actually have an idea, which happens from time to time, that can be incredibly exciting. And so these are all the good things about a research career. Okay, I think I will stop there, and I'm happy to take some Q&A.
Thank you so much for sort of casting the curtain back behind what happened over the course of your career. I think that was fascinating, and the equivalent of taking an hour-long lecture at Harvard. So I think all of us are coming out of this knowing more about the field and about research. So I'll pass it over to the audience for questions. This is your turn. You can feel free to ask Professor Hart questions about his work, about research in general, about his life, about economics, whatever you would like, and he'll answer if he's able to. So just use the raise hand function, and I'll call on you one by one, and we can take about 3 questions. So Aral?
Yeah, hi. It was a great presentation. It was really beneficial. Thank you.
Can you begin by introducing yourself, Aral?
Yeah, I'm Aral. I'm from Turkey, Istanbul. I'm a researcher in Lumiere, and I'm going to be presenting actually my work in the later. So my question is, do you think it is possible to start up a company which uses the circular economy within it, like the whole that economic loop compressed into a company's production process?
You're going to have to tell me a bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, circular economy. What I mean is like this: when you produce something, but at the same time you consume it. Like there's a loop, and there is nothing that you do to just do anything bad to the world or nature, but at the same time you're protecting it.
Well, usually companies produce stuff and then sell it to consumers. Are you thinking of the case where the consumers own the company, or when you say circular, or are you just thinking, I mean, I pick up on one thing you're saying, which is, can companies operate in such a way that they don't hurt the environment, for example? I think they certainly can. In fact, in my most recent work, which I didn't really talk about, I've gone, you remember I was talking about shareholders who might have different attitudes to risk. In my most recent work, I've been interested in the case where some of the owners of the company may be socially responsible. So forget attitudes to risk, but just imagine that some of them care about the environment and care about other people. So if a company, let's say, is deciding whether to, suppose it can make more money, but it's going to increase its carbon footprint. And suppose that is something which is legal. So we don't yet have regulation, we don't have a carbon tax or something. So they're entitled to do it. The traditional view has been that shareholders want the company to make as much money as possible. And so they would be in favor of the company doing this. Again, if it's legal, it's going to make more money. I've been arguing in recent work that it's not obvious that that's correct, because if you actually ask the shareholders, some of them might say, you know what, I'm not really comfortable having a higher dividend, knowing that this is happening because, or at the same time as the company is contributing to global warming. I might actually be in favor of taking a profit cut because I care about, maybe I care about global warming because it's going to affect me and my children and grandchildren, or maybe I care about it because it's going to affect other people in the world, and I care about other people. So yeah, this is not really quite an answer to your question, but it touches on one of the things you said.
Thank you so much.
I think companies should listen more to their shareholders about the kind of trade-offs they are willing to make when it comes to ESG and those kinds of things.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the circular economy is sort of this whole body of research, but I think you did a great job answering the sort of specific underlying question there. I'll pass it to Hetav.
Hi, Professor. My name is Hetav and I'm from Bombay. My research was primarily in network theory leading to market development in unregulated markets. One of the primary things that I heard from your presentation was that you were quite politically inclined when you were at a young age, and that's similar to what I've been experiencing. And similarly, that's what's driven me to take up economics as well. One question that I had is that I'm planning to major in quantitative economics. So would you recommend for me to do a math major or study primary mathematics at the start, or just study economics as my first focus from the beginning itself?
That's a good question. And I basically encourage people who are going to, want to do research in economics to learn a fair amount of mathematics when they're young. That's the best time to learn it. And I think there's no substitute for actually doing a real math course. I don't know how popular this is these days, but I don't think, learning mathematics from economists is not the same as learning it from mathematicians. So I think doing some basic, things like real analysis or some simple topology or linear algebra, or this kind of thing. And then also, of course, these days, one thing I didn't really talk about is that the subject has changed a great deal since I entered into it. And theory these days, the kind of stuff I do, is much less popular than it used to be. These days, people are doing, big data, and it's very empirical, the subject. But even for that, you need good statistical skills and good understanding of probability theory. And I think it's best to really bone up on all that when you're young.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hetav. Han, I'll call on you next.
Hi, Professor. My name is Han Khai Trung. I am from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. My research focuses more on biochemistry, but I want to kind of ask about your experiences because, as you're an academic. So I'm wondering what would you do when you find yourself sometimes stuck in the middle of your research, or like when we meet problems during the work? Because I think that's kind of like inevitable when we're like doing research and looking at new things.
Yes, it is inevitable, and I mean, there's no simple answer to that. I always, when I was younger, I would always kind of feel a bit panicky when I finished a project, because I would be thinking, what on earth am I going to do next? And I'm not one of these people who writes tons and tons of stuff. Some people, I know colleagues of mine who do that. In other words, they're always working on 5 projects at the same time with 10 co-authors. And I don't know how they do it. I can't do that. I'm sort of more monogamous. I do one project at a time. And, you know, and sometimes even now, even though, you know, so I always got scared there wouldn't be another one. But so far, there always has been, although it sometimes takes some time, you know, you have to, you know, I sometimes get down. I didn't really talk about this, but I've certainly had periods in my career. It wasn't so much because I had nothing to do. It was more that the work that I had done wasn't, maybe people were, you know, had some criticisms of it. And it seemed to be falling out of favor when I thought it was good and all that. And that can be quite depressing. So I think one has to be persistent. One has to have that sort of drive. I think I have it. And sometimes it, by the way, it can be, you know, as I say, when you have reversals, you can get down. And I have been down, and you can ask my wife, she's not on the call, but I'm not always the easiest person to live with because I get depressed. But I push forward. That, I suppose, is just a, you know, deep inside me.
I love that. And I think that's something that hopefully Lumia students have started to discover over the course of this summer as well, the importance of just pushing through. Do we have time for 2 more questions, Professor Hart?
Oh, yes.
Perfect. So let's take 2 more. I see one from Tanvi, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you so much, Ruba. Hello, Professor Hart. I'm Tanvi. I'm from Bangalore, India, and my research paper is on technology adoption in aged owner versus aged hired CEOs. My research doesn't specifically focus on the change of shift pre and post-COVID. How important do you think is the research compatibility after a sudden shift in the environment and a sudden shift in the system, like provided by the COVID-19 pandemic?
So sorry, can you just say again what your research is on?
My research is about technology adoption in aged owner CEOs versus
In what, sorry?
aged owner CEOs, CEOs who have a stake in the company, who are part of the board, and hired CEOs who are hired by the board to perform for them. So my question,
I mean, most CEOs are on the board, aren't they?
not my question. No, I just introduced myself with that. My question is the compatibility of research after there's a sudden shift in environment. Is that an important indicator of a good research hypothesis?
You mean, are you asking whether these kind of arrangements will change because of COVID?
Yes.
I mean, I think the main changes we're going to see, I'm not sure we're going to see, again, I may not have got what you're saying right, but let me try. I don't think that the pandemic is going to change, you know, the structure of boards or the relationship between boards and CEOs, or how much, well, it might change the way CEOs are compensated. So my hope is going forward that because I'm now, you know, really a believer in the idea that companies shouldn't always just generate as much wealth for their shareholders as possible. They should be, in some cases, giving up some wealth if they're shareholders, as I say, would prefer them not to pollute. So that might lead to, and I think COVID has also, highlighted this, because the whole way you look after your employees in times like that, it may not be profit maximizing. It may just be that you should actually do something because you care about the employees, and the shareholders might support that. Anyway, for all these reasons, going forward, one could imagine CEOs being paid not just according to the profits of their firm, but also the impact of the firm on the environment. I think there are some moves in that direction. So I could imagine that sort of changes in what goes into the incentive scheme. But the other thing I think we're going to see is, what we've learned, what companies have learned as a result of both the pandemic and the war, is that some supply arrangements are pretty fragile. I mean, we all read about problems in the supply chain, and there's now, I think companies by themselves will realize it might make sense to be a bit more diversified in that, have more than one supplier and have suppliers in different countries, in case particularly, there's some boycott or something. You don't want to be totally at the mercy of one company or companies in one country. And I think governments are also going to be encouraging this more. So I think it's going to be more that we're going to see changes in the companies you trade with. What's it called? Friend sourcing or something, where you okay. So indirect answer to your question, I think.
Thank you so much, Professor. If I understood Tanvi right, I think there was an added layer to her question, which is, how should researchers change what they do when there's this sudden change in circumstances? So
I see.
In terms of what we're researching, the methods we're using, and so on. Yes.
Oh, right. Sorry, I missed that. That's very good. Okay, I do have strong views about that, actually, which may not be popular. So, I mean, one of the things I noticed, when COVID hit, suddenly there were tons and tons of economics papers about COVID. I felt very mixed about that, because I have the feeling that a lot of those, people were sort of jumping on the topical question, but was what they were doing, was it going to actually have any lasting value? I was a bit skeptical. I mean, I think some of it was useful and will be useful actually going forward. For example, the whole question about lockdowns. What are the costs and benefits of lockdowns? I think economists have something useful to say about that. So that kind of thing is important. But I think the idea that you're going to, that an economist is going to come up with something brilliant about the pandemic, in week 3 or week 10, or something, I was very skeptical. And yeah, so that's an answer. Go for the long run stuff, I think. Unless you're, if you're a policy person, if you're sitting in government, then you have to do things, right away. But if you're an academic, you have the luxury to look at it from a bit more of a long-term point of view.
I think that's fascinating and probably counterintuitive to what most of us thought. So thank you for that perspective, Professor Hart. I'm going to pass it to Aditya for a final question, and then we will wrap up this section.
Thank you. So my question doesn't really have much to do with academics, and it's more to do with the job itself. So research is really fun. I really enjoy it, and I've been thinking about pursuing a career to be a professor in the future. So that's my end goal. But ultimately, the question comes down to money and work-life balance. So I've just been curious about how much free time you have as a professor or as a researcher, how much money you get, whether you'd be able to support a family, whether you'd be able to get free time to, travel, which is my great passion. So I've been wondering about, how much time, what the work-life balance is, what the monetary benefits are, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Okay, I think I can answer that. I think it's a pretty good life. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing how much free time one has as an academic. You know, when one has tenure, let's say, you know, I don't like to say this too loudly because people are kind of, you don't want to give the game away. But I mean, I only teach 2 courses at Harvard. You know, I have a bunch of students. Some people have more students and some people have fewer, but you know, I have a tremendous, I have a lot of free time, which I can, you know, sometimes I'm very, very busy working on a paper. But, you know, when I'm done with the paper, and we talked about, you know, what's going to be the next thing, there's probably this sort of lull while you're waiting for something to occur to you. And during those periods, you know, I really have a lot of free time. And, you know, no one tells me I don't have to go in 9 to 5. I go in the days I want to go in. Of course, you have to, you know, go in when you teach. There are certainly obligations, but I would say relative to most jobs, if I think about, you know, if you're in consulting or something, economic consulting, there, you know, you can be, if there's a case that you're working on, you know, you're up at all hours. And it's not because you want to be, it's because someone is telling you to be. And that just doesn't happen with research. Now, in terms of money, I mean, I think the US is pretty good about that. I get a decent salary at Harvard, and I can live quite well. You know, I'm not rich, but I'm certainly comfortable. It wasn't true, by the way, when I left the UK in 1984, I was already a full professor. This was at LSE, London School of Economics, but my salary at the time was really quite low because, and this was during, you know, Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister. She hated universities, so there were cutbacks all the time. And actually, I was really finding it quite hard to support a family on that. But I think that's changed in the UK. And certainly was not true in the US. So I think one can have a good life.
All right, thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thanks, Aditya, for that very practical question to bring us home. And thank you, Professor Hart, for such great answers. I just want to say I had 4 quotes of yours I wrote down that I just loved. One was the idea of finding a real job was totally unappealing. 2 was perhaps just don't do clever things. 3 was I am more monogamous than other researchers. And then 4 is it's a little embarrassing how much free time I have as an academic. So I thought there were so many great one-liners that you have. So really thank you, Professor Hart. It meant a lot to have you here with us. And we'll continue on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Hart.
Bye.
Fabulous. Well, with that, we were going to continue moving on in this session. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephen. I am the other director of the program. I was Dhruva's classmate in undergrad, did not study economics, studied statistics, and then helped start Lumiere as a PhD student at Harvard Business School, and big research nerd. I just want to say right now, just to take a quick moment, we had an amazing conversation with Professor Hart. Just to pause and to say congratulations to all of you. You guys have done something that is truly difficult. It's really not easy to do research at any level, and at the level that you all have done research at is truly remarkable. Again, at any age, but particularly at the age that you all are at. And I just want to take a quick second just to honor every single one of the students here, and all the families. So if we can just get like some clapping, or whatever you will be doing, it's a really a huge congratulations to everyone. I also want to take a second, I think Prakti, it hasn't yet kicked off, to just share something about, I actually think very connected to Professor Hart's work, which is around how organizations can have multiple priorities at once. And for us, we have a real commitment to inclusion and to bringing young researchers in to the fold. And so we're really excited to announce that we're going to be spinning out our financial aid program into a nonprofit organization called Lumiere Research Inclusion Foundation, with a mission of bringing in 1,000 students from low-income backgrounds into research over the next 4 years. And this is just part of our deep interest and belief that research is something that more students should have access to, and that we want to be a part of that mission. Dhruva spoke at the beginning about the opportunity, and we want to make sure that that opportunity is spread as evenly as possible across students throughout the world. So I think very connected to Professor Hart's research about firms and the people pushing them can have many priorities and believe very deeply in them. I hope this is a reflection of one of ours. We will be sending updates to our community about this over the next few months, but please just one thing we want to share, because we're really excited by and want to do a good job with. So with that, I am going to pass, I think, the most exciting part of today, which is not me saying one-liners that Professor Hart said, which I think are hilarious. And it is the presentations for all of you. I'll pass to Prakriti, who is our incredible head of program operations, who's just so fabulous. And many of you have interacted with her over the past 4 months. Prakriti, I'll pass to you, and you guys will hear me back at the end.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that. I think that's the perfect setup for what we're getting into, which, as you can see on screen, are the scholar presentations. This is age-old Lumiere tradition. From the very first symposium we had, we thought, what is the best way to really come full circle, reflect on how the cohort's been, how this entire research program has gone for us, for you as scholars. And we realized one of the best ways of doing that is for you to share the research that you've done with us, with your peers, with your mentors, with your parents, anyone else who you've helped to gate crash into this call. But we're super excited to move into the presentation section. I am just going to give out a couple of quick instructions in just a second, but to give you a high level, we will spend about half an hour going through and listening to actually the presentations that our students have done. And after that, we will come back and do some concluding remarks for the ceremony. So a lot of things happening on screen. This is the information that you have about who's presenting and in which breakout room. So we are going to be opening up breakout rooms in just a couple of seconds. You are free to move across them. So sort of skim through this table, this little leaflet that tells you what are some of the amazing topics that our students have worked on. I can see there's like using AI to develop emotionally driven music, gender equality and long-term economic growth, Joseph Stalin as an architect of the Great Terror, preventing the next pandemic. There is a host of things that our scholars have worked on over the last 4 months that we will be presenting on right now. We will open breakout rooms, as you can see at the bottom of your screen, regardless of whether you are using your phone or your laptop, there will be a little button that enables you to open the breakout room window. You can choose which room you want to go on. The top tab of the screen tells you what breakout room each presentation is in. And if you want to switch rooms, you can do it using the breakout room option or by leaving the breakout room. Like I said, we will spend 30 minutes allowing our students to sort of present their work, share it with one another, and of course, giving them feedback and compliments and congratulations because they've accomplished something so incredible at this stage of their academic career. And then within 30 minutes, we will come back and continue the celebrations. So I am just going to open up the breakout rooms. If you have any questions, our team members are going to be in all of them. We're fairly pervasive that way, so feel free to just shoot us a quick message. I'm just gonna open those up and we will see you in the rooms. Best of luck to all scholars who are presenting. We're super excited for you to see the work that you've done.
Okay, why don't we get started? Okay. My name is Caleb Su. My mentor was a guy from Yale called Alvin Schur, and my research question was, how can a universal Turing machine be created in the game Baba Is You that fits within the game's maximum level size? Sorry, a kind of an outdated research question of mine was in the thing for Breakout Room 3, so I hope you guys weren't too sold on that. Next slide, please.
Ritika, you share your screen? For some reason, you can't see the screen.
I'm trying, just give me a second. I'm just sorting this out.
You know, I have it on my computer. Could I just share my screen?
I can sort this out. Just give me half a second. Steven, can you see this?
Yep, yeah. You go next slide.
Okay, for some reason, it isn't letting, can I share this with you, Steven? Would you be able to share this?
Yeah, absolutely. Inka, why don't you share screen while you're,
Yeah.
I'll get that.
All right. Let me just make a new window. Screen. All right, let's go. So the Turing machine, for context, is a theoretical construct from 1936 invented by the late great British mathematician Alan Turing. It consisted of what he called a tape head moving left and right along an infinitely long tape and writing numbers like this. He proposed a subset called universal Turing machines. These have some interesting features. For one, they're capable of universal computation, meaning given enough time and the correct input, they can theoretically compute anything. It has also been proven that no computer can ever decide with certainty whether a Turing machine will finish running its program or just go on forever. Because of these implications, systems that can simulate universal Turing machines are of much interest to computer scientists. These are called Turing complete systems. All right, so Baba Is You is a puzzle 2017. You can see some of its levels here. And since its release, it has attracted the attention of numerous computer scientists and programmers. Because of this, I personally was very surprised that only one attempt had been made to prove the game Turing complete. And I noticed it had numerous flaws. For one, it required that Baba Is You take place on an infinite grid, something the native game does not support. It also required a user, before starting the Turing machine, to manually place an infinite number of objects in the level. I realized this meant no one would ever be able to start the machine. For these reasons, during my time at Lumiere, I set out to create the first real proof of Turing completeness in this game. And this is what I ended up creating. So this is the level in action. You might be wondering what all this text is doing. I should explain that the gimmick with Baba Is You is that through carefully placed text, you can alter key properties of the level, like which characters are playable, which objects are solid, which harm the player, which can you push around. I've just had to add a lot of text in order to give this level all of the custom properties of a universal Turing machine. And I almost made a literature review at Lumiere until I woke up one morning and had a revelation, which is, what if instead of trying to lay out arbitrarily many objects in an arbitrarily long line, which would take up a lot of space, what if I stacked arbitrarily many objects into an arbitrarily high stack? The thing is that a stack of objects in Baba Is You, no matter how tall the stack is, it only takes up one space in the level. So that's how I ended up storing data. Sometimes my machine needs to divide a stack of objects by 6, and this ended up being the most time-consuming part. This level took me 17 hours to make. And it has major implications for the game Baba Is You. First of all, it means Baba Is You can now compute anything. By moving carefully around the level, the player can customize the input and program for this universal Turing machine. And given enough time, it will be able to compute anything with it. Furthermore, I've proved that Baba is you will never be solvable by computers. Because recall, computers can't figure out whether universal Turing machines can finish their programs. Well, I added a property to the level that wins the level if and only if the Turing machine finishes its program. Therefore, a move that starts the Turing machine, a computer can't figure out whether that is a winning move or a losing move. So computers will never be able to have the full picture of what the optimal move in Baba is you is. I also wanted to acknowledge that my machine currently can't handle very large amounts of data, but I tweeted this paper directly to the developer, and they explicitly confirmed that in a later implementation or update, this limitation would be removed, and my custom level would truly be able to handle arbitrarily large amounts of data. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, we will maybe take a little time at the end if we have extra time for questions, but thank you so much for this. And I love your hustle and also your serendipitous moment when you woke up, which I'm quite jealous of. I'm gonna pass now, and you see my screen is working. Yeah, fabulous. Elizabeth, I'm gonna pass to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. No matter what time zone you're currently in, I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you today. I am Elizabeth Streeter, and with guidance from my mentor, Joseph Cohort, I investigated a case in international relations with applied anthropology using the research question, has not being legally recognized as refugees affected those displaced by environmental disasters throughout the first 2 decades of the 21st century? Next slide, please. Now for a little bit of background on my topic. The escalation of the phenomenon known as climate change has caused a worldwide surge of environmental events. A growing area of concern in the 21st century, these climate-related disasters include storms and floods and are heightened by the rising unpredictability of temperatures, as demonstrated by increasing heat waves and droughts. Victims of such environmental change, climate migrants, are individuals subjected to these worsening disasters who are forced to move from their original place of residence. Unfortunately, there is no existing legally binding legislation that provide any significant protection for these individuals. For example, the 1951 Convention on Refugees does not cover climate migrants, prohibiting them from claiming refugee status and receiving the associated rights and protections. Next slide, please. This research paper used the following 2 methodologies: the use of a literature review. This methodology was applied to evaluate the way refugees and climate migrants are viewed and to discuss previously proposed solutions to their situation. Through the evaluation of these areas, I was able to establish some background knowledge and gain insight on the depth of the situation. This also helped shape the next stages of my research. The second methodology was the use of case studies, focusing strongly on the denial of the refugee status and the importance of perspective. I prioritized an anthropologically inspired viewpoint through the investigation of 2 case studies, Kiribati's Ayoente Toyota and the country of Guatemala. With an analysis of past, current, and possible future situations, I came across several findings to my research question. Next slide, please. First, it was further established that due to the worsening global environmental situation, climate migrants are in urgent need of concrete legislation and assistance. However, the primary 2 findings were the difficulty of distinguishing economic migrants from climate migrants, as well as the importance of the factor of time. The first point is strongly connected to the lack of legislation. While I have stated it has to be created, in the process of the establishment of a new policy, it is essential to figure out how to differentiate between climate migrants and economic migrants. All the individuals in both case studies could technically be attributed to either side of the spectrum. So while there is a good basis for climate migrants to be considered as such, it is important that this distinction is strengthened if any legally binding protections are to be put in place. The second point is the importance of the factor of time. Noted in both case studies, both circumstances could have had different outcomes depending on the time horizons considered. While in both situations the individuals were not in immediate lethal danger when originally deported, evidence points to the fact that both positions have a high chance of drastically worsening as the climate crisis intensifies. Therefore, deciding the timeline with which such cases need to be considered is just the first step towards adaptation in a world where climate change has become an undeniable, escalating reality. This was my presentation on my research paper, Climate Migrants and the Denial of Refugee Status. I would like to take this opportunity to once again express my gratitude to my mentor and the Lumiere Research Scholar Program for giving me the opportunity and the foundation to explore and take a deep dive into a topic that has long been of interest to me, and for teaching me skills that I'm 100% sure will continue to guide me on future research journeys from here on out. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Love that. And it's such an important topic. I loved your final picture of just making it so real, how large, large problem this is, and will continue to be. I'm going to pass to Ranjani now to share about her research.
Hello and good day, everybody. I'm Ranjani Sarkar, a grade 12 student from Pune, India. First of all, I'm really honored to present my research paper at this Lumiere Symposium of the Summer Cohort 2020. I would take this opportunity to thank the entire Lumiere team for onboarding and sailing me through my entire research period. I also express my highest gratitude to my mentor, F.A. Farrell, for her best and most valuable continuous support in making this research paper possible. Recently, we all have been through this infamous COVID-19 pandemic, and hence let us all pray that we don't have to face another one in the near future. In the same context, my research paper is about how to prevent the next pandemic. Next slide, please. An outbreak is a sudden increase in occurrence of a disease when cases are over an average expectancy for the location or season, whereas an epidemic is an outbreak that spreads over a large geographical area, and pandemic is a global epidemic. Pandemics can occur annually in each of temperate southern and northern hemispheres, which are called as seasonal epidemics. However, they cannot be considered as a pandemic because they affect very low number of, I would say very few people due to their occurrence every year. As a background, it's all about the outbreak, the epidemic, and the pandemic, and the different occurrences, reoccurrences in the past history, and all the present ones. Several types of researches and actions are going on. It's how every human, individual, society, and authority has reacted to control or eradicate the same. Sometimes as a negative consequence, there were exposures to, for example, new diseases or disabilities or premature losses too. Next slide, please. I would like to thank my mentor, Effa, for her super brainstorming with me during every meeting session. She also guided me through various research methodologies to shape a research paper. And after all the minute review and careful considerations, we conclude that literature review is the best option that goes with my research question. This paper is composed after thorough research through various reliable resources, including scientific journals, books, and articles, and even other research papers and multiple blogs on numerous social media sites. Finally, it is shaped after various interdisciplinary contexts, including topics such as immunology, epidemiology, social and public health, governmental policies, microbiology, and social media too. Next slide, please. Obviously, there are findings. Mostly all adopted the probable solution to this problem is by defining, measuring, and analyzing all the problems of all previous and existing pandemics and taking potential and preventive measures using the existing and new resources. Many countries had a positive response to this COVID-19 pandemic, mainly by following the governmental policies, including countries such as Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea. There are many others who struggled as they refused to follow the policies in the fear of financial losses and social issues as well. Countries like Japan introduced social punishments to prevent public negligence. while others introduced penalties. However, this pandemic has led to the birth of the mRNA vaccine, which is considered as a major breakthrough in medical science. Now, what's an mRNA vaccine? An mRNA vaccine introduces the messenger ribonucleic acid of the virus into the human body. It is much faster and more effective than the traditional protein vaccine, which we always have had since younger days. And as mRNA is more effective because the ribonucleic acid of the virus is much easier to produce. I tried to create this paper as precisely and concisely with an aim to impact the readers and thus mankind and society with a definite awareness of various facts of most of the problems and subsequent analysis story with definite resolutions of each, and which surely will lead to the prevention of the next pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I love the relevance here. We're not gonna take a break. Do not believe that misleading slide. Certainly an issue and a huge topic, Ranjay, that you're tackling, and I'm sure you felt the enormity of it as you're researching. Congratulations on that. I'll pass to you for your presentation.
Hi everyone, I am Arda Kanchal, an 11th grader from Turkey, and today I will be talking about my research paper, Site and Wave Energy Converter Selection for Wave Energy Implementation in Turkey. Firstly, I want to thank Mr. Alkavne and the MedCos Foundation for all their help. I started my paper with the research question, which wave power converter system should be used in Turkish sites in terms of economical feasibility and power effectiveness. If we could go to the next slide, please. Before I dive into the technical details, I want to explain how my research is relevant and important. Today, one of the biggest existential threats to humankind is global warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions. Nations across the globe try to reduce their emissions by implementing renewable energy, since approximately 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are linked to the usage of fossil fuels in the energy field. The current European target is to accomplish climate neutrality by 2050, and a new European Union climate law established to decline greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% until 2030 in comparison with 1990 levels. Wave energy, amongst other fairly new technologies, presents us a huge potential in the conversion to renewables, since the global wave energy resource has been estimated at about 3 to 3.7 terawatts. Wave energy is especially significant for coastal nations like Turkey. However, there isn't sufficient research or field tests in Turkey compared to other nations. Moving on to my next slide. In my research, I use data taken from the Wind and Deep Water Wave Atlas for the Turkish coast, which consists of the data of the NATO-funded NATO2Waves project. My paper utilizes the annual wave rows, significant wave heights, mean period scatter diagrams, seasonal wave roses, monthly average, and extreme significant wave height graphs provided for every 30 kilometers of the Black, Aegean, and Mediterranean Sea coasts, and in every 10 kilometers of the Marmara Sea coasts. The wave power potentials of each site are calculated using the site's significant wave height and wave periods. Further indices are only applied to the 20 sites with annual mean significant wave heights of more than 1 meter out of the 209 locations. Later, the site's monthly variability indexes are calculated, which is an important metric to consider for wave energy production, since it demonstrates the changes in the wave power between the months. For this metric, annual mean wave power and the mean available wave powers for the most and least energetic months are utilized. Lastly, sites' wave period exploitation development indexes are calculated, which is an indice used to determine the stability of the wave energy resource. WebPedI is calculated using the mean wave period and the maximum wave period values. Moving on to the next slide, when all sites are listed with their corresponding indices values, it was found that the 3 sites, can we move to the next slide, please? Sure. It was found that the 3 sites, Datça Muğla, Kalkan Antalya, and Farmakonisi, are the best sites for wave energy implementation in Turkey. Moreover, the power potentials of these sites were used to determine the WEC qualifications, And it was found that fixed WECs with nominal powers of a maximum of 15 kilowatts per meter should be implemented in order to maintain an economically efficient power plant. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation and allowing me this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Arda. And I love both the enthusiasm of the research, the thoughtfulness, and your enthusiasm as well. You're just clearly someone who just makes other people excited by research. I've never seen a wave equation I was so excited by. So thank you for that. We'll pass it out to Suhani for
good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Everyone, my name is Suhani Haq. I'm from Bangalore, India. I started the program in the summer, which is when I was paired with my mentor, Kristen Lee. Eventually, I decided my subject of research to be post-traumatic stress disorder and further its impact on sleep disturbance. I formulated my research question to support the two-way relationship that the two have. The research question now reads, what is the bidirectional relationship between post-traumatic stress disorder and sleep disturbance in adults? Next slide, please. To give a little background about the research that I did, PTSD is a long-term psychiatric disorder that occurs in the aftermath of experiencing a traumatic event. According to the US National Center for PTSD, about 6% of the population will have PTSD at some point in their lives. Research on PTSD in the States has increased significantly during the past 30 years. The conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, are a few examples that have stoked scientific interest in PTSD. Additionally, evidence shows an association between sleep disturbance and traumatic stress symptoms, with about 70 to 90% of those with PTSD who report problems with sleep. Today's sleep disturbance is a common symptom of PTSD, and there are multiple treatments that attempt to understand how interventions would eventually reduce disturbed sleep. One small area of the field covers the impact of sleep disturbance on PTSD. It's a very new perspective on mental health that is further explored in my paper. It has not been much researched because sleep disturbance is a common symptom of PTSD, but there are few studies that have shown that sleep disorders are a risk factor for the onset and progression of PTSD, which I will talk about soon. Next slide, please. To talk a little bit about the method and analysis, this paper follows the format of a literature review. So the purpose of it was to knit together theories and results from multiple studies and to give an overview of a field of research. There were multiple correlational studies and experiments that I included. The studies used in this review are all those conducted in the last 12 years and are therefore relatively recent. The studies are also those only performed in participants between 25 to 65 years old, so adults. There are multiple aspects of sleep disturbance that this paper couldn't include all of them, but included a selected number that are displayed on the screen. I used Google Scholar to find original research on PTSD and sleep disturbance. I used archives of research papers, studies, and journals. I looked at cited articles and literature from papers that I had been using. I used the DOI link to find more papers and research websites to gain facts. I finally managed to organize all the information I had found and divide my paper into 8 final sections, covering an introduction, the bidirectional relationship, specific populations, treatments, and a discussion. Next slide, please. So these are the main findings of my literature review. It looks like a lot, but I'll try to sum it up. Studies suggested that patients with PTSD have significantly more disturbed sleep and lower sleep efficiency compared to those without PTSD. Evidence also showed that sleep disturbance caused by PTSD is difficult to treat and reduce. On the other side, studies show that sleep disturbance also increases symptom severity and exacerbates PTSD symptoms. But again, this field needs to be further explored. A clinical population that I had studied were war veterans and IPV survivors. War veterans are prone to sleep disturbance and PTSD and suffer much more poor quality of sleep in comparison to others. The same showed for intimate partner violence survivors. I mainly researched 2 treatments, which was cognitive behavioral therapy and lucid dreaming therapy. Studies showed that aspects of certain treatments like CBT are effective in only treating some components of sleep disturbance. like lucid dreaming therapy was only successful in treating nightmare component of sleep disturbance and not others. To conclude, a multitude of studies have been conducted to investigate this. However, there is a lack of experimental work for sleep disturbance to PTSD. Future research, in my opinion, should focus on conducting more experimental work in the field of sleep disturbance to PTSD and use objective sleep measures to increase the rigor of research methods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahani. I really appreciate that we're in an incredibly important topic for all of us, especially with PTSD. I didn't realize there's 7% of the population has experienced or will have experienced some form of PTSD. It's a massive number. Wow. Okay, guys, we have about 3 minutes before we need to go back. So feel free to, if your camera's on, flip it off, run to the bathroom, grab something to eat. We're going to come back together into the main room in 3 minutes. So that's 11:30 a.m. EST. And then do your time conversion as to what that means for you. Probably means 2 minutes from now. And then we'll come back. But thank you guys so much. It's incredible. It's incredible to see the level of it. I know for those who want to stick around, I know there might be some open Q&A. I got a message from Caleb about that. So if you guys have any other open questions about it, we didn't package it into the structure, but if there's anyone who has any open questions they'd like to ask, happy to take those as well. We have like 2 minutes, probably like 1 or 2 questions. Anyone has any questions? But guys, please feel free to take a break. We'll take a break in 2 minutes. Caleb, I've got a question for you. I will ask while other people take a break is, did you know the developer in advance, or did you just like straight tweet at him your paper or her your paper and then just you're just like unilaterally?
I just randomly tweeted it at them.
I love that. I love that. It's kind of amazing that they responded. I mean, it's also amazing what you did.
I've heard that sometimes you, shoot your shot, I guess, in more ways than one, academically. Go, Caleb, woo!
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna head back to the main room. I have to share something, but thank you so much, Caleb. Love your project. It's so cool. So incredible, your hustle.
Okay, thank you, presenters. It was so enjoyable. Did the presenters have any other questions for the other presenters, or did anyone in the audience have any feedback or compliments that they wanted to shoot across? We can do that now. It can be over text, it can be out loud. There are exactly 3 faces, 2 faces including mine that I'm seeing. So, anyone else? Oh, it's just me now. Okay, thank you, Caleb. No? Okay, no worries at all. Why don't we all head back into the main room? I'm sure.
Thank you so much for coming here. It'll be great if you all switch on your videos. We will start in a minute now. Well, yeah. So, welcome to room number 2. We have a line of really exciting presentations to go to. I have been looking at these presentations, super duper excited to see what our students have come up with. Let's quickly start. So our first speaker is Hudson Melanie, and she is going to talk about the workplace. Hudson, you can take over.
Hi, my name's Hudson, and I'm going to be talking about conflict and gender within teams. Do I tell you when to? Okay, yeah. So my topic was diversity and conflict in work teams, and my research question was, how does diversity influence intra-group conflict and team collaboration? the hypothesis that I worked with throughout my research was the more diverse individuals are, the more intergroup conflict there would be, which negatively would affect how they all work together and how they collaborate and what they're able to produce together. So some background. So demographics cause differences in a workforce that is already very attention-driven place, as everyone is competing and trying to succeed within the same job. There's a critical variable in the performance and product of what a team can do consistently. These group conflicts are issues that also form something from social identity. And social identity is the groups and categories individuals place themselves into based on their personal work lives. And especially in our world today, social identities become much more prevalent as a lot of people identify differently, and there's a lot more boxes in their work traditionally. The study targets the population on the screen, 17 through 70, because they're of age to work within the state of New Jersey. And 2 different skills were used based on past methods and research. And so that's how we kind of went about asking questions. So methods and analysis. In the survey, 36 participants were sampled within different jobs. These participants ranked different statements on a 1 through 7 Likert scale, a strongly agree to strongly disagree, or very similar to very different, so that we were able to grasp different answers on different spectrums. The organizations and jobs surveyed were based on a convenience sample approach, meaning that the participants surveyed were one of the most straightforward and most accessible at the time, and availability to me when conducting the survey based on location, flexibility, and time, and they were also the most responsive. Individuals used an online survey link is allowed it to be anonymous, and so they would not know who was sending it to them or who they were actually taking it for or what it was even being used for. And each participant ranged from 17 to 70. They were also from different demographics, so ethnicity, race, gender. And some of the strengths we focused on were anonymity, the broadness of how many different jobs we surveyed and different fields, few variables conflicting within the actual survey, and then we used different scales to get different answers and work with different data. So some of the results, the Cronbach's alpha 0.747 shows the correlations between conflicts. We had multiple conflict variables, so 1, 8, and 10 were based on goals, mistakes, and equality within the team. And they all related back to diversity and how similar individuals were within the group. So they all connected and related to each other. Cronbach's alpha was based on conflicts of understandable things. So things that we were able to actually understand that other people were going through. So empathy and equality. And this was in correlation with gender and race. So we're more empathetic and more understanding to people that we can kind of connect to. And this showed that there's heavy correlation with each other and that gender and race are treated equally when in a group of very diverse individuals. The more diverse, the less the group members rated being treated equally within a group. And the more diverse individuals were, the less likely they rated being treated equally based on gender and conflict between people within that group. So people within their same gender really looked at it more than someone else who was not the same genders, and they really felt treated differently than that. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for presenting. And this was so concise. And I was just looking at the data that you got, the stats, and these are very, yeah, like I was kind of lost in the data here. Really, really amazing work. Moving on, our next presenter, we have Mrigangi, who's going to talk about the connection between AI and ML and songs.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Mrigangi. I'm in grade 11, and I study at Oberoi International School, Mumbai. So I'm from India. And I wrote this paper under the mentorship of Mr. Abhinav Chaudhary. Yeah. So emotion is one of the main reasons why people engage and interact with music because a song can express feelings, It can produce goosebumps, and it can trigger specific memories. So MIR, music information retrieval, is one of the most researched areas in extracted features for emotion, which include chords, harmonies, melodies. There's a lot of research done in this area. However, not much research has been done in the area of generating lyrics. Scholars are still trying to understand the music lyric auto-generation by machine learning models, but very few have been successfully achieved this. We need an algorithm that can predict emotion that a listener perceives in lyrics, and that one that could dynamically generate music. And we need one that, and they aim to critically evaluate on whether AI and ML is successful in copying the way in which a human writes music or the way in which a person thinks. In this project, I've also analyzed the top web-based song lyric generators and whether they are satisfactory to the target users. So natural language processing. So basically, natural language processing methodology and various other pre-trained literature models are studied by Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. I have done a literature study on various AI development in music and evaluated the elements. So some of the NLP models are Lyric Jam, which was done in University of Waterloo, Lo-Fi Player by Google, Juke Deck by TikTok. But some of these which are closely related to music are Magenta AI Duet, Cyberphone, which checks social sites, Shimon in Georgia Tech University, and Spawn, which interacts with environment and community. There were also pre-trained models like BERT by Google, which helps in text prediction, DBERT by Microsoft, which is for the position of words, and T5 by Google, which is text to text. So the next thing that I studied was machine learning and deep learning. So I studied about 9 researchers to understand how ML and DL algorithms for lyric generations and accuracy work. So basically, some of these are convolutional neural network, CNN, RNN, DAE, DBNS, and LSTM long short-term memory are some of the most popular ones that have been used. Some of the ones which are more accurate are hidden Markov model, SVM, support vector machines, conditional random fields, CRF. Yeah. So emotional models, I studied various other researches to understand how emotion models are used for helping extraction of emotional features. So there are basically 2 types. One is categorical and the other one is dimensional. So the dimensional ones include Russell's 2D model and Plutchik's 2D wheel of model, which basically include complex mixed emotions, wide range of emotion classes, and which are highly recommended in application involved in emotional similarities. Some of the more big data resources are like corpora and lexicon. I also conducted a survey on the top web-based auto-lyric generators to check their quality. Some of these lyric generators were These Lyrics Don't Exist, boredhumans.com, lyrics.com, songlyrics.com. And basically how I did this was that I entered in a few prompts that they asked me according to the lyric generators, and they generated a whole song on it. I sent these out to songwriters, vocalists, lyricists, musicians, singers, and I got a pretty good response from them. So some of the observations that I made were that it was very difficult for us to capture the meaning and the emotion of the song. The lyrics and the sentences were pretty good, but the words really got repeated, and most of them were actually inspired and lifted by already existing songs written by other musicians. Next. So overall, I studied about 10 research papers, and I found that machine learning, deep learning are some of the most used approaches for writing songs. However, the most accurate results were found using hybrid approaches and combining two or more research approaches. This gave us a more accurate song lyrics, which did not seem as if they were written by um, a machine. So definitely more research is still being done in this area of music. And these song lyrics can really be used by lyricists and songwriters especially when they're having writer's block and they just need a little bit more inspiration. So this is really helpful for them. Done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was a really amazing take on music, and I think people in the chat also agree. This is a really cool way of making music more technical and AI ML stuff more fun. Thank you so much again for taking up this topic. Moving on, we have our next presenter, Seong Yang, who would be talking about the application of current mechanisms of base editors to treat PKU. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Soin and I'm from Korea. I'm currently a senior attending Chadwick International School, and through the Lumia research program, I was able to conduct research on a topic that I was really interested in since I was in middle school, which was genetic engineering. So basically, I chose to research about the application of current mechanisms of base editors to treat PKU. PKU is a genetic disease, and I'll talk about it more later. But the reason why I chose PKU as my genetic disease was because I love eating, and PKU prevents people from eating. So next slide. So in order to start with my research, there were two components that I had to understand. One was PKU, obviously the genetic disease, and the other one was base editor, which was the technique I decided to choose to use to treat PKU. So just to explain to you briefly what PKU is, it is basically a genetic disease caused by a mutation in the phenylalanine hydroxylase gene located on chromosome 12. The important part here is understanding the function of the PAH, or the phenylalanine hydroxylase. So as shown in the figure here, phenylalanine hydroxylase converts phenylalanine, which is one of the essential 20 essential amino acids, into tyrosine, which basically is a really important chemical that can be used as a neurotransmitter. So if there's a problem in this enzyme, then this conversion cannot happen, and therefore the tyrosine cannot be made, while the phenylalanine will be very high in concentration, which can lead to a lot of different problems like mental disorders, behavioral problems, and so much more, intellectual disabilities. So I've decided to look specifically at base editors, but so when we usually think about when we usually think about genetic engineering, we usually think of the CRISPR-Cas system, which is like one of the more traditional ones now. So base editing is a more novel technique than CRISPR-Cas system, but it is based on the CRISPR system. So it is unique in that it can install really specific changes in the genome, and without making the double-stranded break. So there are two strands in the DNA, but the traditional system would break both strands, whereas the base editing system would break only one strand, and therefore the change would be more specific. Next slide, please. My research was primarily the literature review method. So it was basically synthesizing information after reading various sources. And I read a total of 20 research papers, and I searched under the keywords PKU base editors and different types of base editors. And below are just the guiding questions I've used to choose my papers. Next slide, please. So the final conclusion that I arrived at was that while base editors show promising potential as a treatment for PKU, it still has a lot of room for improvement in that base editors can, while it can correct the mutation, the change in base editors, it can also cause other changes in the genome, which can be really, really dangerous and cause other genetic disorders. However, one recent study showed that actually base editors proved, this was an in vivo study, which shows that it is really, it shows that this technique has great potential to be applied to humans as well, as it showed that in mice with PKU, base editing did a great job in treating the major symptoms of PKU. So this was the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so fascinated by the variety we have, right from AI/ML to CRISPR. And continuing with this, we move on to Vinayak, who's going to talk about top quark mass extraction. Vinayak.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, I'm Vinayak, and over the summer I participated in the Lumia research program. My mentor was Andrew James Wildridge, and my area of study was top quark physics. So right there we have my research question, which is what is the impact of event selection on top quark mass extraction in the dielectronic TT bar decay channel at a center of mass energy of 100 TeV. Now it sounds like a mouthful to say, but it's actually quite simple. So let's get into it. Next slide. Yeah. So what is the top quark? Now, growing up, we were taught that all matter is made up of the proton, the neutron, and the electron. But actually, scientists went a step further and found that the proton and the neutron actually consist of other fundamental particles, the top quark being one of them. And on the left, we actually have a map of the standard model of particle physics. And it's interesting to note that the top quark is the most fundamental, massive of these fundamental particles. And hence it becomes an important tool which is used by physics to study other particle physics, such as the Higgs potential or the electroweak theory, as well as to actually look for new physics. So these fundamental particles, we actually don't find them all around us. They're only produced at these high energy scales and particle colliders. And the top quark itself is produced at the LHC and at the proposed future circular collider in top quark and anti-top quark pairs. And this top quark actually decays into a bottom quark and a W boson. And the way the W boson decays further is actually how we actually classify each event. So in the research question, I mentioned the dielectronic TT bar decay channel. So this is actually one of the channels in which the W boson decays. The top quark is actually has the most precisely known mass measurement. And recently in April 2022, we got the most precise measurement for the mass of the top quark at 172.33 plus minus 0.07 GeV. And this was done at the Large Hadron Collider, which is in CERN in Switzerland. However, at higher energy scales, such as at 100 TeV, which I was actually researching, we may actually see new physics associated with top quarks, which are produced at these higher energy scales, as well as the fact that more top quarks are actually produced at higher energy scales. Next slide, please. So since this was a proposed study of the SEC, since we are actually we're generating all the events at 100 TeV, we use Monte Carlo tools to generate data. So these are essentially simulations which actually simulate experimental data. What we did first was we selected all top quarks produced by the Monte Carlo, and we actually did a plot of the mass measurements. Now it's interesting to note that there's actually no single mass measurement of the top quark, and rather we get this distribution of sorts. After that, we basically did an object and event selection, which involved cuts on leptons, jets, and d-jets. These are essentially the things which the W boson and the bottom quark decay into further. And based on this, and why we did this was because we wanted to separate signal events of the top quarks, the ones which we are actually studying, from background events originating from other physical processes, which we actually have which we don't want to actually study. After that, what we do is we take a Breit-Wigner, which is basically a probability distribution, and it's often used in particle physics to study unstable particles such as the top quark. And we actually try to fit that to not only our mass distribution for top quarks before event selection, but after event selection too. And we do this using a Python package known as SciPy. And after this, we actually arrive at both a mass measurement of the top quark as well as an uncertainty value for this measurement. On the right, we actually see the number of leptons before and after object and event selection has actually taken place. So yeah, next slide, please. Yep, so what were my findings? So I found that without any event selection, the top quark was measured to be 252.48 plus minus 86 GeV, while the mass of the top quark with event selection was found to be 281.24 plus minus 103.10 GeV. And the first thing that stands out is the fact that there's a large relative uncertainty, and this is attributed to the fact that only a small number of events were selected. So I began with 26,000 events, but at the end I was left with only 94. The reason being that I was working with a small sample of the actual data, and my computer couldn't actually handle all those computations which would have been required to perform on a large data set, because all this data is actually produced in like millions and billions of events which are actually produced, but I studied only a small number of them. It was interesting to find out that not only were the two mass measurements indistinguishable from each other with an uncertainty, however, the two mass measurements were also indistinguishable from the mass measurement by the CMS collaboration back in April 2022. This was not what I expected, because I, of course, thought that not only would there be a difference between the mass measurement before and after event selection at the FCC, but also difference in mass measurement between between what was found in the FCC as well as the LFC. So what would my recommendations would be? It would be basically devoting more resources into the Monte Carlo simulations as well as other algorithms, so that we actually see the differences in mass measurement as was expected. And on the right, we just have the summary plot of my entire research paper. So that's actually what those 3 months led to. Yeah, so thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one major takeaway from this presentation for me is that I do know something about quarks. I started this presentation thinking this entire thing is going to go over my head, but I am so glad to know I can make sense of this now. On that note, moving on, we have Eric next, who has one of the more interesting questions tonight. Eric, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Leck-Palmer. I'm in grade 12, and I'm from the United States. So my topic of research is in the humanities. I had the pleasure of being mentored by Heather Jarling from Princeton University. And my question is, to what extent was the Great Terror a product of a strong or weak Soviet state? I chose this specific question and looking at the Soviet Union because I have recently developed quite a large interest in totalitarian states and dictatorships. And I think that this form of government is something that I think everyone should have at least a little bit of understanding of. I think it's very important political context, especially kind of like going into the future and looking at how international relations between countries shape up and how history affects that. So once again, my question is, to what extent was the Great Terror the product of a strong or weak Soviet state? Moving on to some background information. So the Great Terror was launched by Joseph Stalin and his secret police force known as the NKVD. It was a series of politically driven purges that began in the mid-1930s, but reached an apex of terror between the years of 1937 and 1938. The purges were intended to be used as a political device by Joseph Stalin to solidify his status as his supreme status as general secretary. But they ended up getting out of control, and suspected opponents were punished regardless of evidence. And this happened in a manner in which essentially everyday people were accused of being enemies of the state and were arrested with very little evidence. And these often included former leaders, suspected spies, and members of political parties that had been outlawed after communism prevailed. But as I mentioned, ordinary people were victimized and given unfounded blame, which caused the terror to spiral out of control and eventually claim up to 1 million lives. And the basis of my research question is that while it's widely accepted that Stalin was the central architect of initiating the purges associated with the Great Terror, there is controversy over, what was the pretext to which these purges emerged, whether they emerged from a strong state, which carries the implication that the purges were a planned systemic occurrence that Stalin had a very close control of, or whether they emerged as a product of flaws and weaknesses in the Soviet state. So moving on to my methodology. So I use two different qualitative methods of analysis because my paper is in the humanities. So the first one was a literature review, which provided me with an understanding of different political schools of thought and the academic landscape on the Great Terror and popular views that are held on this topic. I analyzed the works of 4 prominent scholars of the Soviet Union, and in researching a variety of scholars, I had the opportunity to see kind of like the evolution of academic research specifically related to the Soviet Union. Most of the research that I examined was mostly based on either Stalin as a leader or the strength of the Soviet state. And from there, I took this research background and moved on to my case study methodology, which I examined specific events in Soviet history and how they kind of applied those to my research question, to whether they prove that the Soviet Union was to whether they prove that the Great Terror was the product of a strong or weak Soviet state, and whether certain kind of like aspects of that could be identified. So this brings me to my conclusion. So ultimately, I concluded that Stalin's vast network of propaganda made many Soviet citizens believe that they were living under a powerful network, but it served as a facade to conceal the administration's inadequacies. I examined that the qualities of a strong state during my research include the presence of a capable bureaucracy that's able to enforce public policy and rule of law, and it should be able to spread its authority evenly. However, Stalin's USSR did not follow these guidelines. Soviet bureaucracy was incompetent and inorganized, which resulted in very low public morale. State record keeping was very inconsistent, and security was generally not good as well. Regional Soviet leadership was also very fragile. The state defaulted to terror when challenged by anti-Soviet forces, and other methods of appeasing the population were not explored by Stalin and the USSR. So despite Stalin's brutal direction, I concluded that the purges were ultimately the product of a very weak Soviet state. So thank you so much for listening. And again, it was a pleasure to be part of this program.
Thank you so much. This was so fascinating. This is one of those events that you keep reading on more and more about, and there's some new insight every time. So thank you so much, Eric, for bringing that out. On this note, this is a special room because we have an extra presentation here. We have Hetav with us, who's going to do a special presentation for all of us. So Hetav, you can share your screen and start your presentation as soon as you're ready.
Yes, okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes. So my research question was, how do non-fungible tokens or NFTs influence the causal links between brokerage antecedents and brokerage? So my research mainly was in network theories, which again is a humanity, but I associated it with one of the modern contexts of an unregulated market, which is the NFT market. And the title of my paper is A Class Act: Brokerage Orientations Across Social Classes is Driving Market Development in the NFT Space. So one of the reasons why I chose this was that throughout the vast literature of network theory, there's really scarce information about how an individual broker can contribute to market development. And secondly, economists even now struggle to understand how NFTs actually work. So my paper actually integrated these two concepts and tried to explain how brokerage or a single broker can cause such heavy market development in a really unregulated and non-conventional market. And by the way, my name is Hetav Mehta. I'm from Bombay, and my mentor was Andrew Foley from Cornell. Yes. So a small background on my research. So my research, as I said, was in the unconventional market space, the NFT industry. I think most of us know what NFTs are, but I just say they're basically non-fungible tokens that have a piece of code inside them that enclose art, music, tweets, etc. And they make big news waves in the internet about how their price is so volatile or it's so high. And they rely upon basically Ethereum, which is a cryptocurrency. And here I picked out a specific broker called Gary Vee that many people will be familiar with, and how his contributions affected market development and how he conducted brokerage in this industry. So this is the methods and analysis for my research. So the first thing is the literature analysis. So I primarily analyzed and built upon the theories of several important papers such as Bograti and Halgin, Burt, Kwon, and Obstfeld. And I also looked at certain seminal papers of entrepreneurship such as Frank Knight and Kersner, etc. The second thing that I did was background development. So I primarily had to build an entire background for my NFT space and my particular broker. So I had to do a lot of extensive research on the broker's life and his activities before and after the main brokerage. The third thing is building a timeline. Based on the background that I developed, I built a timeline with all the significant points of where brokerage actually occurred, or they were contributing to brokerage in the future. And this timeline was really important in devising my brokerage model, which is my fourth stage. So here I built a 3-stage brokerage model with pre-brokerage, brokerage, and post-brokerage or harvesting, and explaining how different brokerage orientations occurred in all the aspects. So this is my timeline and this is my brokerage model. So my timeline basically talks about July 2010 to August 2022 and how different events such as Bitcoin surging or Gary Vee starting VCon or VFriends, here, which was my case study, helped in market development. And then I used all the empirical evidence from this case study in order to form my own theory or my own theorized model here, which you can look at. It's my brokerage model. So here, as you look, there's 3 stages: the pre-brokerage, brokerage, and post-brokerage or harvesting. So I basically explain how socially an individual interacted with different groups of people in different classes and it persuaded them to invest in a certain thing that did not have much credibility. Here, the person used credibility from their previous successes, such as predicting Bitcoin, and showed how that the investors can invest in it, and it appealed to both the masses and the elites. And then after this, the broker basically changed their whole orientation to integrate the masses and the elites into one common space, thereby acting as a control coordinator. So one of the more interesting things of my paper is how a broker basically first separates 2 classes of people and then integrates them in order to derive profit from both areas. And one of the most interesting things that I gained from this entire paper was how in an unregulated market space like the NFT market, individuals can really cause a lot of market development by interacting with the right people at the right time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hetav. That was really, really interesting. And I'm so glad we had the time to include you as well. As you all can see, we have to be back in a minute. So we can talk here, you can check out the other rooms, or we'll see you back in the main room in 50 seconds now.
Woohoo! Yay, everyone! Congratulations. Super interesting presentations.
Perfect. Well, welcome back, everyone, from all the different rooms. Thank you so much. Shout out to room number 3, where I was at. We had some amazing projects, ranging from taking a video game and identifying whether or not it's Turing complete by looking at the lack of regulation and laws for climate refugees, looking at the effects of PTSD on sleep, and many more. And I think it's just a reflection of the diversity of what research can be, and the remarkable, it's just awesome things you guys have done. Honestly, it's really, really cool to see, just to be totally honest. Seeing some room 2 shout outs. Okay, interesting. You guys were in room 3. You don't know what we saw. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. The next slide. And finally, when I diss room 2, now room 2 is great. Definitely named appropriately, number 2. Let's go to the next slide. So what's next? What is next? Oh my God. You guys have like done so much. You like cried over your laptop. You have looked at Google Scholar. Your mentor has been like, where the heck is this deadline that was due 2 days ago? You know what I'm talking about. It is done, unless you haven't submitted your paper, in which case, please, that is what's next. Please submit your paper. The biggest thing is to join our alumni network. That is an amazing group. We've actually had some meetups on college campuses of our past years, which has been cool to see. But importantly, we for many of you who are currently students, we're also having a mission officer talk. So it'll be happening throughout the year. So if you guys want to talk to mission officers, we thought this was a really cool opportunity. We just started it really this past summer to give a gateway to students, to people who are making decisions in the mission world, something that I didn't have the opportunity to do in high school, and I wish I did, frankly. And so that's a big part of the reason why we have it, is just to give you guys, as some of the best students on earth, opportunities to talk to people making decisions at a lot of these amazing schools. Second piece is stay active on Discord, and that's a great way for you to stay in touch and to stay connected to everyone else. I just want to end this by saying, kind of going back, like now 10 years, which is so crazy, to some of our final days. Drew and I met doing a research program together. We met because we were both doing these super nerdy projects. I was doing a project on totally irrelevant to being a 19-year-old. I was doing a project on the retirement transition. So if you want to ask me about that, we can totally talk about that. Research is wild and fun and crazy what you can do. And I remember when Drew and I ended, we thought, okay, this is like the end. We didn't really know what would happen from there. We both ended up taking that seed and starting PhDs, becoming researchers, of course, working on this. And I hope you guys take this small experience, meaningful, hopefully, but of course, small in the scope of your life, and take it forward. Because if you've done that, then it really will have meant a lot to you, and it meant a lot to us. So just want to say a big thank you again to everyone here, all the students, parents, mentors, Lumiere team. You guys are all superstars. Room 3, you know who you are. You're in my hearts. And thank you, everyone. I think we'll wrap up right there, and enjoy your mornings, afternoons, and night times. Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone.